This video has been supported by Mach Motors. Thank you very much for that. So folks, today it's time for a consumption test. At the same time, it is so hot that my iPhone gave up in between. So I had to adjust the system a little bit. I will not film the entire trip, but just the parts where I have to tell you some data so that you know where you are. Because right now I had 45 minutes of traffic jam, and that means that would totally kind of bias the results and distort them. So I will just, once we start after this construction site, tell you the situation. So where we are with consumption, time, and distance, so that we know where we really are and then calculate later what that means for the concrete consumption. That makes the trip shorter than I normally had planned, but still 80 kilometers one direction is plenty to measure. So we're finally leaving the construction site soon. By the way, the truck shows why it isn't here not that clever to go on the left lane, because they really sometimes do not give you the space you would need. And by the way, the whole test is done at a maximum speed of 120 kilometers per hour to make it comparable. So I will give you now very soon the data, and afterwards I will just drive without filming, because otherwise I risk that the iPhone will give up and then we lose all the important information. So now we start. But first things first, please subscribe to my channel. That would be super nice. Thanks so much. So the values are 24.2 kilometers, 50 minutes, 19.8 kilowatt consumption so far, and 94% battery. We're now slowly approaching the end of the first part uphill. I have to say, so far, the result is positively surprising. I would have thought that the car is substantially thirstier. It was not that easy to drive constantly, because you every now and then have to brake and slow down. So I sometimes sped up to 130 so that the average is hopefully quite consistent. But so far it looks really nice, I have to say. So we're close to the exit, and here are the values. 99 kilometers, time 1 hour 28 minutes, average consumption 22.7 kilowatt hours on 100 kilometers. And we arrived at 74%, so it used exactly 20% of the available battery, because we started off at 94%. It's a pity that one has to do it this way, because with a Tesla, it would be a lot easier. I would have just reset the trip. That was it. Here, I would have to stop, get out of the car, close the door, wait a second, open and get in again, and then it would have reset the entire trip. And that means that the slower parts just count into time and consumption, and I don't want that. That's why I give you the numbers when I'm on the highway, and then at home I can calculate exactly what was consumed at the right speed. That makes it just a lot more precise. It's, of course, a pity that I cannot do a full live stream. That would have been more interesting for you and for me, talking to you while I'm driving. But that would have been so distorted that it would be completely meaningless. So, starting now downhill, we are at 101 kilometers, 1 hour, 29 minutes. Average consumption still 22.7 and 74%. So we arrived now at the end of the test track, so to speak, and we are at 175.5 kilometers, 2 hours, 7 minutes, 22.6 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and 56% of the battery. So we use 38%. What else can one say? In comparison to the city, it's really different. In the city, I said that I feel the weight of the car more than in the G6. There's a bit more body roll. And here on the highway, that is no problem whatsoever. I put the air suspension on Comfort Plus. Yes, if you go on Sport, it is a lot harder. But on Comfort Plus, it's just like flying on air. And of course, I'm not going very fast, but you can easily go to the maximum speed. Then probably you want to go to a different setting, maybe sport or so. Not sure you want to do that because you can assume that the consumption will be very, very high and substantially higher even than in the G6. That's just where physics come in when you go at very high speeds. It would not be surprising if this car needs substantially more than the G6. This has a value of 0.27, and the G6, if I remember correctly, has 0.227. So it was to be expected. It's also a heavier car. But otherwise, a car with which you can do long distance very easily. I would say that just rough calculation means you will probably make something like 400, 410, 390, somewhere there, kilometers with starting at 100%, and you go fully down. So let's say realistically, you might go 350, 360, and then charge. And that is a very good value for such a car. And you have to consider that this is a really demanding test because this has a lot of meters of height to cover. So it's not an easy track. You can see that here. I show you the elevation profile. Whatever you really come up with as the result value on this track means that is a totally realistic one wherever you travel. So here you see the part when you go uphill, and then of course it's the same downhill. Of course, it also means I don't think it makes sense to go to 130 or higher. For the simple reason that the consumption will increase exponentially, whereas the time gained will be minimal. That's, of course, different for cars like sedans, like the P7 Plus or the Model 3, which are just far more efficient and have less drag coefficient. But this one is, I think, a really nice car for long-term travel. Of course, 400 kilometers is not like record-breaking with such a big battery, but expectable. I would like to know who of you is driving a comparatively big car like the Volvo XC90 or the BMW iX5 or so. Of course, that one has a huge battery in comparison. But in general, if some of you drive really big SUVs, bigger than an Enyaq, bigger than a Model Y, it would be interesting to see what their real range is in comparison of consumption versus battery size. So here are now the results. We had 74.8 kilometers uphill, 74.5 downhill. Both times we need 38 minutes. So the average was 118 and back nearly 118 kilometers per hour. That's pretty good, I would say, if I want to check for 120. We had 17.68 uphill and 16.74 downhill. So we had an average of 23.64 kilowatt hours. And we had then downhill 22.46. So a little bit less, which fits, of course. That's how it should be. And you see that the kilowatt hours used really fit to the state of charge of the battery. It's sometimes even really just spot on. And we have to always consider there is an error margin of 1%, because if it says 74%, that can mean 73.6 or 74.5. And we can also compare it to the G6. That one had an average of 20 kilowatt hours, and that was 19.5 downhill and 20.5 uphill. So that's very comparable. We see that the battery is about 15% smaller than the G9, and the consumption was like 15% lower. So one could say really pretty much head on. They are the same in terms of the realistic range at 120 kilometers per hour, which is 400 kilometers. Of course, that means that you have something like 360 kilometers for the realistic range from 100 to 10%. So I would say that result makes sense. That's it. Ciao.